Ivan, great to see you. Knowing that we both lived in Atlanta, you now live in Minneapolis, so thank you for getting up so early. I was astonished to see that General Mills have over 100 brands in over 100 countries on 6 continents. And just to continue the neatness of the cricket stats here, you are in fact the sixth person to do this podcast. So welcome, great to have you here. Couldn't be more delighted to share this one with you because it was always our intent that we should get some humour into our chats, and I know we'll do that. But how are you? How are things?
I'm very well, David. It's a joy and a pleasure to see you again. You and I have interwoven our careers, and yes, I like being the last ball of the over.
The last ball of the over. How appropriate. But you're bowling googlies endlessly, aren't you?
Yes, and balls and googlies should never really be talked about in America in the same sentence.
No. And actually, just on that, I mean, I was remembering when I was reading up to prepare for this, the cultural divide that you cross. And actually, in my case, one of my early presentations in front of lots of people in that auditorium you'll have done them in, we were talking about the upcoming World Cup. And I was talking about how much I like football. And I said, as Bill Shankly said, you know, it's not a matter of life and death. It's much more important than that. A lot of people laughed and a lot of people looked horrified. I paid no attention to this until I was summoned by the General Counsel, who told me to curb my sense of humour. So that was my cultural learning early. What about yours? What have you found different? What have you found interesting?
You know, the honest truth, I mean, obviously, you and I both worked at Coca-Cola. What David's referring to for the audience is Mr. Wheldon was the director of advertising for the world for Coca-Cola, and I was working at Wheldon and Kennedy as a lowly media planner. And we were preparing work for the European 1996 Championship, soccer championship, or football as we call it. And Mr. Wheldon came and helped us make one of the best ads I think I've ever worked on, which was eat football, sleep football, drink Coca-Cola. And working for an American company that was starting to get to understand soccer around the world and the power of it, you know, was a really interesting thing to play in. And I'm exactly the same as you, David, which is one of the biggest challenges coming to America was getting them to really understand the power of humor. It wasn't just that our humor was different, but how important humor was in the world, and especially in the world of marketing. And that was a big transition for me, working out how to stick to my belief that being funny is part of the joy of life, and yet trying not to be offensive, which was one of the curses of my upbringing.
It's amazing. I've seen you introduce yourself in a video when somebody asked you a question. You said you were born at a very early age and you didn't bat an eyelid. I thought it was magnificent.
Yeah, that's. I think I stole that from Eddie Izzard. So Eddie Izzard's a British comedian, and I'm pretty certain I saw him say something like that. He said he was born at a very early age and raised by wolves. So
yeah, well, there you go.
People don't really understand the British humour. So yeah.
Ivan, I mean, I think we've touched on a couple of cultural differences, and the key ones for me were always humour and getting that right, not just in the tone of advertising, for instance, but even in a presentation. And as one of the best presenters I've ever seen, how do you manage that? I mean, how have you done at General Mills? Because obviously your second great role after Coca-Cola.
Well, thank you, David. A great compliment coming from you, one of the smartest people I ever worked with. I'm not entirely sure I'm a great presenter, but I think I try hard to present well. And one of the big tricks, of course, in presentation, just like making an ad, is working out who your audience is and how to connect with them. And yet at the same time, of course, you have to stay true to yourself. And one of the disconnects that often happens is around humour. And that's one of the greatest cultural differences. The way, for instance, the British use humour, both in advertising and in just daily life, and the way Americans perceive humour. And you have to try and work hard to get it right.
Yeah. And have you used much humour directly in marketing communication for the US brands?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I go back to my early days in advertising, where the kind of the mythology was that American marketing helped sell a product and British marketing helped a consumer buy a product. And, the Americans were very direct and very straight and just sold, and the British went around the corner and said something funny, and you found yourself buying it the next day. So I think humour in the culture over here is perhaps less prevalent than it is maybe in somewhere like England or even like France, and certainly Latin America. And so humour is used, and sometimes quirky humour can be used, but it's a lot more often about emotion rather than
Yeah.
about humour.
So we're touching on all sorts of things here, but when I was reading up on General Mills, and this is probably worth sharing for a wider audience, it's one of those companies that people don't know enough about. It has an incredible array of brands. Many of them are fantastic US brands, and many of them I miss. I used to love Wheaties, for instance. And even in Madrid, there is an American cereal shop where you can go and buy Wheaties. Can you tell us a little bit about the brands you've been working on, and maybe through the lens of COVID? Because I think your response to the pandemic as a company has been astonishing. And can we weave in and out some brands and response to the pandemic?
Yeah, well, I agree with you, David. General Mills is one of those companies that a lot of people know their brands, but not many people know General Mills. And that actually is a really good marketing question to work out whether or not there's something to be gained from that. But we have brands around the world like Betty Crocker or Old El Paso or Haagen-Dazs ice cream. A lot of the cereal brands like Cheerios and Wheaties and Lucky Charms, and then smaller brands like Annie's Organic Goods over in North America or Yoki down in Brazil. And General Mills as a company, it was interesting how we approached the pandemic. Of course, we've got a business in China, very big with Haagen-Dazs in China, 400 shops, but also a local brand called Wan Chai Ferry Dumplings. And so we're connected with China. We could see what was going on in China and how they were dealing with the pandemic. But probably more importantly, we looked back from what had happened in previous socio-economic challenges and looked at how brands had fared during that time. And the old adage of like Winston Churchill, when you're going through hell, just keep going. I think that sort of approach was good. And I think for us, the primary focus for us was, first of all, to protect our people. We have over 30,000 people around the world that work directly for General Mills. So make sure that they're safe was number one. And then the second thing was actually keep doing what it is that we're here on the planet to do, which is make food the world loves. And during the pandemic, they were going to need it as well. So, packaged food that you could put in your pantry and rely on if you weren't able to get to the grocery was actually something that was a social need. So we focused on that first. But then I made the call very early on that we were going to keep advertising. We were going to keep telling people about our brands to maintain a kind of two things. One for them was a sense of normalcy, and one for us was a focus on brand building, which during a crisis you realize who your friends are, and that's kind of what we decided to do. So that was our approach. But of course, you couldn't say good things unless you were doing good things. So woven into all of that were the actions our brands took, where one of the places we can make a difference is make sure people don't go hungry. And you'll have seen, the queues at food banks all around the world, and those who are less well off were not able to get food. And so we made sure we donated, supported, and helped ordinary people who didn't have the money to buy food, and extraordinary people who were working on the front lines who perhaps needed a snack bar in their pack of lunch.
Yeah. And I know you studiously avoided those rather painful emotional ads that were with us all the way and that nonsense. I mean, was that a C-suite discussion? Did some people want to do it?
Oh, that's a good question. It was people asked, should we? I don't know that anybody at General Mills is wired to think that we should do it. So I think it was, as I said, much more about do the right thing first. And And of course, we did talk about what we were doing, but we didn't do that we did not feel that was, and I certainly did not feel that was the role for an advert. It was what my CEO, Jeff Harmning, would say when he was asked about it on CNN. But it wasn't,
Yeah.
I'd rather spend money selling Cheerios to families than selling General Mills to the media.
And obviously, some of these brands like Wheaties have always had great marketing ideas at their core. Breakfast of Champions, one of my favourite things in the branding museum is a Wheaties pack with Muhammad Ali on it in 1999. And I know this year you've worked very closely with Serena Williams. And could you touch a little bit on the other really incredible event last year in every meaning of the word, George Floyd, which is, of course, happened in General Mills's hometown?
Yeah, so it's a really good question. When George Floyd was murdered in Minneapolis, obviously we had to do something, but we were already doing things before that, of course. But we could not stay quiet during that moment. And so we did what we should do, again, looking after our employees and listening to their concerns, but then continuing the work that we've been doing. Wheaties is an interesting brand. First appearance on the box was a baseball player called Lou Gehrig, after whom a disease, unfortunately, is named. And he appeared in 1934. And Wheaties was the first brand in the world to ever do an advertising jingle, believe it or not. So it had a bunch of a barbershop quartet singing a tune on the radio a long, long time ago. But that idea that we were using the power of the box and the power of sports people for the last 80 years. We'd already done this, but you could see our opportunity to not just represent the sports star, but represent what the sports star was thinking. And so we've started to leverage the power of sport and the power of influencers, and start using their power for what they stand for too. So for Serena, Serena was scheduled to come on the box, one of the greatest tennis players, one of the greatest athletes ever. But as we were working with her, and she's coming back from motherhood, and she wanted to talk about the things that she was doing, and then some of the injustice happened. We pivoted with Serena to make sure that we were supporting the Equal Justice Initiative with her, and use Wheaties to help do that. And then we went from Wheaties. There was an event in the middle, which was the women's US soccer team winning the World Cup. So we did a box with them on, and we actually did a limited edition where all the money went. It cost $23 to buy the box, and all that money went to girls' sports. And then we did LeBron James and his I Promise school. So you can see this illusion of the power of the sports star and the power of a social conversation. And it allows us to allow them to talk about things that are super important in society, which I've always thought is one of the powers and one of the responsibilities of brands to do that.
Yeah, and I do think that the kind of social purpose that you bring to life through these brands is authentic because it's based on the fact it's great food, but it's intriguing because it's history. I mean, a bit like, just to switch to a couple of your other great brands. I mean, you could argue that they were the first to really use celebrities in an interesting way. Odd celebrities in Green Giant and the Pillsbury Doughboy, I know, but celebrities nevertheless, and
Yeah.
they've endured all this time. But actually, while we're on Pillsbury, I did love the fact that in Germany you don't call it Pillsbury, you call it rather oddly Knack and Back, which is a name you need to be careful of, I think.
Yes. Well, the people that work for us are called knackers over there, so I always think that helps. But it is interesting, so we are in 100 markets, and yet I think we're a little bit behind in the notion of global branding. And so we're accelerating that quickly. And of course, with today's connected world and connected society, things travel, and you can benefit. You can make more money in more places for less effort now, just because of the infrastructure of not only the technology but also culture. So we're looking at how we harmonize our brands around the world. And to the question earlier about General Mills, as an unknown entity, in India, for instance, we're known as the Pillsbury Company. That's what the merchants and the retailers think of General Mills, despite the fact we're called General Mills. They still see us as Pillsbury. So there's work to be done there. But yes, enduring brand assets. Like we say, we've got the Wheaties box, which is and the Breakfast of Champions, Pillsbury Doughboy. Betty Crocker turns 100 years old this year. It's very interesting about all this stuff about personalization and really understanding the consumer and doing personalized messages, because of course Betty Crocker was invented to respond to letters written to General Mills about our flour, and she started writing back with very personal messages. Dear Mrs. Springer, thank you for your comment on our pancake mix.
1921, I think you started that.
1921, October of 1921. It's an interesting story, just as a side. We'd run a competition where in newspapers where you had to solve a puzzle, and we thought the puzzle was harder apparently than it was. We got 30,000 responses, and you would win a bag of gold medal flour as a result. So as along with the responses to the competition, we also got an unprecedented number of old-fashioned letters in the mail. And one of the smart advertising people there went, wow, this is consumer engagement 100 years ago. We have data, that we have, which is called a name and an address. And we have the opportunity to create, a recurring loop of connection here with our consumers. So they decided the best thing to do was write back, and they started writing letters, but couldn't decide whether they should sign it General Mills or Gold Medal Flour, and they decided they'd call it Betty Crocker. So they wrote back and literally signed the letters Betty Crocker. They used the script of one of the people in the office, and they used Betty because it was the wife of the ad manager, and Crocker because it sounded like something to do with cooking. So consumer engagement using data and analytics, and they use the feedback for product innovation, which sounds very familiar today.
I love that story because of the, again, the authenticity of it, and it is that great demonstration that nothing's changed in marketing. Another great speech I saw you do, Ivan, was in Toronto, where the thing that was really prevalent in everybody's mind was some of the naughtiness that Google and Facebook were getting up to, some of the over promises of the digital promise, and that notion that everything has changed and the future is all digital. And as you've just illustrated, Betty Crocker knew better back in 1921. You and I share another thing in common, which is we're both not fans of this endless polemic about is marketing dead, and should we drop the title and should we have a different one? I mean, and obviously you lived through a Coca-Cola company that dropped it, and we both watched it quite correctly restore it. But can you touch on that a little bit, because you have so many great marketing stories?
Well, I think it's interesting that we went through the 3G era. I think we've got consultants who don't believe in marketing as a business driver. As 3G were pushing big companies to think about cost savings, and the consultants coming in doing what they do well, which is understand all the how you manage the tangible assets of a company and make them more efficient. I think we saw a very big and very disappointing reaction from the corporate world, which was to start to think marketing was becoming something that could be replaced by machines and not done by human beings. Roll that forward, a lot of companies, around about 70% or 75% of big corporations had a CMO in the C-suite of the Fortune 500. It was declining quite rapidly, actually. It was down to 70% 2 years ago, and big companies like Coca-Cola had got rid of it. Those companies didn't do as well as the ones who held on to the marketing. And actually, it's difficult to talk about the silver lining of the pandemic, but one of the things I think the world has learned, the world of business has learned, is that the ability to understand what your consumer is going through or your customer is going through, and the ability to do something about that, turn it into a story is good, but action is better, like we just talked about with Betty Crocker.
Yep.
If you turn it into an action, it actually helps the company, both internally, its employees are proud to work there, but more importantly, externally. And so I think we're seeing a swing back to the power of marketing as being a fundamental and crucial role inside the fortune of a company.
Yeah, but it is. I mean, again, you touched two or three things there. I love the recent Bob Hoffman quote. He's always good on his sound bites, which was, management consultants are pretending that they know how to do advertising, and even worse, advertising agencies are pretending that they know how to do consultancy. And I
Yeah.
think I responded, wouldn't it be great if they both concentrated on what they were good at?
So I agree. I actually do think what Accenture is doing is interesting, and in fact, we're working with them on a couple of things, because I do think the it's not a binary choice between the old world of marketing and the new possibilities of marketing. It's how do you bind them both together well. But I'm with you that what we should be doing is looking about, well, what's the problem and what's the best tool to answer that problem. And the notion that somehow marketing is dead in a world with more channels, more choice, more competition, and less barriers to entry than ever before, I can't imagine a better kind of mix of circumstances to say marketing is more important than ever it was.
Yeah, but I do think it is the sharing of the case studies that you've talked about, and I also think in your history books at General Mills, there's some great lessons for marketeers. The Depression, you doubled down on marketing. You introduced your first innovation director and innovated some great new cereals. Second World War, you used your factory lines to help create things for the military. One of the first submarines that could turn around, and it actually General Mills palpably had turned the course of the war. Is there a General Mills archive? Have you been able to dig into it to look at the past and the lessons from there?
Yeah, I mean, again, with a very old company, I do think there's something super interesting here about history and optimism, because for a very old company, like we talked about Wheaties and the brand, or Betty Crocker being 100 years old, the idea that somehow the people who are the current marketers know best is perhaps something to be challenged. And I work with a chap called James Somerville at Coca-Cola, and he had this thought about kissing the past hello. And for any marketer in our organization, the first thing they do when they come onto a brand is go to the archive and see where did Nature Valley come from, and who originated that, and why did we make it, or what is it about Cheerios that allowed us to do the puff gun? And there's a great history of innovation at General Mills. As you said, it's a company that actually is very interested in the science of food, and the science of engineering and producing food that is good for you and affordable. And there's been lots of things that we've done off the side of that, whether it's fortifying food after the First World War, whether it's inventing new ways of making food. But the side products are things like General Mills invented the black box that is in aeroplanes to track flight recording, and invented, as you said, a deep sea submarine to help marine exploration. And so that constant curiosity about what is possible is built into the future-facing thinking of our brands. But it's like Isaac Newton said, if you see further than others, it's because you stood on the shoulders of giants. And those people that came before us and the things that they did, whether it's writing a letter and signing it Betty Crocker 100 years ago, or whether it's sitting here and thinking about, how you use LeBron James and his power to do Twitter, where more people watch his tweets than sometimes watch his live games on TV. How do you think about the future? So I think it's in the DNA of General Mills that we do that.
Yeah, and I think to great effect, because you will come out, no doubt, of the pandemic stronger, the brands will be stronger, and you're celebrating some great basic marketing, which is listen to the consumer, take the feedback, act on it, do something, do the right thing, and invest behind it, and you'll flourish.
I was brought up understanding about brand architectures and brand houses and brand foundations, and I think we're having to move, because that's the way the world is, to a much more organic thought. That it's not really about a structure that you build and then maintain. You have to be able to flex it as you go through life. So we're starting to talk about a thing that we're calling a brand anatomy. So I need to know what's at the core of me, what's the skeleton, what's the bones that hold me up, and how do they maintain over time that strength. But I also need to know that today when I walk out the door, is it hot, or how am I going to dress to stand out? So we talk about our purpose being an enduring, but our positioning, for instance, being flexible to the moment of what's the competition doing and what's the culture doing at the time. So, but Yoplay's purpose, of course, needs to go back to goodness is good and badness is bad. So,
Which is great.
we have a slightly different articulation of it today, but it endures. And if you're sitting on a brand that works, whether it's Coca-Cola or Nike or Ford Motors, you know, if the brand works, you use the word authentic earlier on. And as an English teacher, you'll remember the etymology of that word, because I can't. I was going to make something up there. So I'm sure it's something about being true to yourself.
Exactly.
I mean, autos meaning the self in Greek, I think. And if you set off in the original with a purpose, which was a point of view about why your brand exists, it's very difficult to change that every year, because you know, you're giving up equity, and if you build on it by your actions, as you said, and you market it in your marketing, it just becomes a stronger set of bones that can help you walk through the world with your head held high.
You know, these days, as everybody looks at purpose, they of course look at the UN Sustainable Goals, they look at the ESG agenda, and as Mark Ritson gloriously says, an awful lot of bollocks is spoken about purpose. But it's so important to the world that everybody gets this right. I mean, how, again, interested in the C-suite polemic around that, because I think we've done well on the marketing response in the right way to the themes of the moment. But what about ESG more broadly?
So ESG more broadly, I think, I mean, I fundamentally believe for a very long time that, you know, big corporations have power, and with that power comes a responsibility, and that responsibility is to make the world a better place. So whether it's showing society what we think a better world is in our advertising, think I'd like to teach the world to sing in Coca-Cola, or whether it's using your power to make, you know, how you, for instance, how you source and create your products. So, for instance, I think you'll see there's a big conference for investors over here where companies, food companies, especially Cagney, they show their plans, and almost every single big food company is now talking about one of its core strategic pillars is sustainability. And I think that's good, because I think governments alone will not solve climate change or social injustice. And when corporations start doing it, representing their consumers because their consumers want it, and then start taking action, I think good stuff happens. There's a big research company over here called Morning Consult that do a very good internet kind of driven questionnaire every year about how people trust and how people love brands. And they'll tell you that the things that drive sales of products and growth of brands, the drivers are the things like, in food, for instance, does it taste good? Is it good value? Does it do me good? Can I trust you? Are you a company that, you know, when you say it's got 5 ounces of stuff in it, it's got 5 ounces of stuff in it? So they're the drivers, and they haven't changed, David, to the point you made earlier. You know, marketing was looking at that 100 years ago. What's true about me, and what do you want, and how do I put those two things together? But the differentiators these days are things like social purpose and your approach to climate change and the way you treat your employees. And so the drivers, you know, 70% of people on average will say these things are important. 40 to 50% will say, you know, your environmental footprint is important. And I think the real trick is to do both, of course. So, for instance, at General Mills, we're big advocates of what is called regenerative agriculture, which is going back to some of the practices, actually almost of the middle-aged kind of farmer, about how you cover crop and how you treat your soil and how you graze livestock and how you take fertilizers and chemicals out of the system and how that creates better soil. So we think that that's super important, and we've got science that proves it. We've committed to do 1 million acres of regenerative agriculture, which is 25% of the farmland from which we buy, yes, our oats and our grains and our wheat, but also where we're getting our milk from. But we're also calling on other companies to say, hey, that's what we've done, and we want you to do the same thing. So with that, the topsoil on the planet, we've lost so much of it that the UN would say there's only 60 or 59 harvests left now until we run out of soil. So if companies don't do something, I don't think it's the government's interest, for where they make their money. They're not going to do anything. So that's kind of how we think about purpose. And then you go to it and you say, for those drivers and differentiators, you can't get away with just saying that this is, we're great, we're doing regenerative agriculture and make bad product. But when you do both together, a flywheel starts, and I think it could make the world a better place.
As you know, this whole focus on sustainability, I think, has been accelerated by the pandemic. And the WFA, of course, are now really keen to help companies do exactly what you said. And a bit of that is sharing stories. I mean, people should know, that what General Mills are doing with regenerative agriculture. Can we talk a little bit about recruitment? Because, one of the things I'm seeing more and more of is it is true that the youth of today are much more balanced in how they see the world and what they expect of companies, and indeed what they expect of where they're going to work, in a way that, I certainly, being older, was ever, if I can get a job, it'll be great. I'll worry about whether it's the right one later. Are you seeing that in recruitment? And do you see that, what you do is attracting better talent and maintaining better talent?
Yeah, I think we do. We realise that this. I think I'd probably challenge a little this notion that this is a more environmentally conscious group of consumers than ever before. I think young people always are looking for the future to be better. I remember when I was at school. I mean, I grew up through Margaret Thatcher and the miners' strike and the Falklands War and Culture Club. I mean, I had to put up with Culture Club as well. So there was a lot of things that shape you as you grow. And of course, you want the world to be a better future. So I think young people have always been interested in this. I think this generation has more information, more ability to connect, and more power to kind of foment change than we did when we were young. So I think the individuals, yes, just the level of consciousness here is amazing. And then you're right, David. If you are not doing this as a company, you will not attract the best talents, and you will not attract and retain talent that is going to make the biggest difference. So we do see it. We see it as the right thing to do. General Mills is a company that, it's a Midwest company that's founded on ethics, on its character, and its purpose in the world. That honestly lives in the people. I thought I was working at the best company in the world when I was at Coca-Cola, just because of the work they did and the people they were. I went to General Mills, and you realize, there are brilliant people everywhere in the world, and honestly, for me, many of them are working at General Mills at the moment. And when a company does that, it's not just that you want to work there so they can recruit, and it's not just that you want to stay there, it's that you want to do your best work there, and you want to do the best around those principles, the values that the company has. So I think it always was important. I think it's more important now than it's ever been before. Because I say, because of the consciousness, the shared consciousness for the next generation of what this means, but also because of the kind of the precipice that we're standing on the edge of. I read a book called The Sixth Extinction, which is shocking, or The Uninhabitable Earth by David Wallace Wells. So these are ordinary people writing about extraordinary things. It shocks you. So we've had 5 extinction events on the planet before now, according to this book, one of which was a big meteorite coming and hitting us, apparently. The other 4 were all climate change related. And, over 90% of life on Earth, not humans, all life, disappeared in each of those events. And they were triggered by temperature changes that are of the magnitude that we're looking at right now. And it's not will the Earth survive, the Earth will survive, it's whether life will survive.
I do hope that the pandemic will have caused a mass reflection, let's call it that, where everybody thinks about, how we can reset and build the world back better. What's your tip for CMOs in this, and what do you think they should have at the top of their inbox, Ivan?
Ooh. So you said earlier on that, General Mills may emerge stronger. I would ask people to think about what it was that they did differently in this time that made them feel that the company or their brand or their own personal job was getting better. And I think if you can capture that, we've done a lot of work on that, how we've become, I'm not allowed, this is about the humour, I call it catching the F train, right? Or even worse, getting effed up. We've got faster, so agility. We've got flatter. We've distributed decision making around the organization. We've got fiercer. We've kind of gone, okay, well, how do we win during this time? We've got more future focused. How do we think about what's happening next, not really just about what's happening now? Interestingly, how do we have more fun? So, in bleak times, like you said, humor and a little bit of laughter and creating fun is actually a very joyous event. And, it makes life worth living. So, fast, flat, fierce, focused. We've got our priorities set, more future facing. So lots of things beginning with F. We're going to work on G next. But when we get to G, then we're going to be an unstoppable force.
You'll really be riffing. You'll have noticed, by the way, that I was writing that down. And the good news is, whenever I borrow things from people, I always borrow with credit. So I promise I will say, as Ivan Pollard says, it's catching the F train, which
catching
can be
the
taken all sorts of ways.
Just like you, legal counsel talked to me when I said that at a company meeting, and they were like, well, be careful what you say, Mr. Pollard. So I was like, yeah, okay. I said, why? What do you mean? What else begins with F? Which one did I miss?
But I do think, that to your theme of fun, and I know, first of all, one of the reasons I think you've always been so brilliant to work with is your humour, your humility. And when I was watching you talking about being a contender for WFA Marketer of the Year, you said you'd already voted, and you'd voted for Mark Pritchard. But better than that, you said another thing, which is, look, it's not about me, it's about the people that do this. It's a we thing, not a me thing, to paraphrase. And you also talked about people should have fun. And I couldn't agree more. If you're not having fun at work, what a shame, because you spend so much time there. And through this phase, when it's really been difficult, it needs to be fun too. And I do think deep and rich in learning, that is true. Ivan, one thing that we also like to ask every guest we have is, who else would you like to see in one of these podcasts, stroke video casts, when the tech works?
When the tech works, honestly, I think I'd like to see you in it, David. I think you should get a few CMOs to interview you, because you've had such a storied and interesting career, and you've done. I'm not blowing smoke in your direction, but I look at your.
Feel free.
When I was in advertising, I was like, wow, that's a good guy. He's good. And then you jump from agency world to client world, and I was like, wow, he's gone to Coca-Cola. That's good. And then you went off and did your next things, and I remember working with you at Vodafone, and I think you should be interviewed just because you've seen so many different angles on the things that we do. So I think that's good. I don't know if you've had Mark Pritchard on yet.
No, not yet. We should.
Yeah, for all the stuff we talk about, the power of marketers to make the world a better place. I mean, I'd vote for Mark for the marketer of the year, because I think, you know, their P&G's approach to diversity and inclusion has been something we should all look at and all follow. So I think he's great. Um, I'd also love us to be talking about creativity a bit more. I think
Yeah, I agree with that.
from the stuff that, sure, tech and data and all that sort of stuff is important, but you know, it's still, when you knock on somebody's door, even if that door is a mobile phone or something that they're going to get on Spotify, you better say something interesting. Because somebody else is going to knock on the door the next day, and you want to win. So creativity. So I'd love you to be talking about, you know, some of the great creative directors, not from now, but from the era before now.
All right. Well, listen, those are fantastic challenges, and thank you for the nice words. What an absolute pleasure to talk to you. Made my day, literally. Really great to see you, and great to see what you're doing and what General Mills are doing. And I think our audience will be grateful that you took this time to talk to us. So thanks very much.
Listen, thank you very much for having me. I think this is a great idea that, you know, we need to eulogize and advocate for the power of marketing, not just marketing, but better marketing.
Well, what a fantastic conversation. I think we could have gone on for a lot longer than that. Looking forward to the seventh conversation. It's going to be with Connie Brahms, recently appointed as the Chief Digital and Marketing Officer of probably the world leader in the sustainable agenda, and that's Unilever. So come back and see us again soon in April.